Heroes Like Us is a series intended at sharing comic book characters from various backgrounds and identities. We won't always get everything right, so feel free to make amendments and corrections in the comments. They're always appreciated. What's not appreciated, however, is any form of hate speech or intolerance, so comments of that nature will be immediately deleted and those users blocked from this channel. This is a place of education and celebration. Welcome to Heroes Like Us, the series where we look at an identity or background and we give you some examples of heroes that have that identity so that young kids, people can look and see there are heroes like us. So today we are starting in what will likely be a 3 or 4 video, 5 video series for African American heroes and heroines. So we are going to just have a sampling here. I'm spreading out some of the really popular ones and mixing in some that you probably haven't heard about. So there's going to be a lot missing from this. Again, this will be 4 or 5 videos, but here is the first sampling. We are starting with the DC character, Cyborg. Cyborg's real name is Victor Stone, and when Victor was a kid, his parents were scientists, and there was this explosion, and it almost killed him, and it wrecked most of his body, and so they built him cybernetic implants to allow him to survive, and eventually this turned into the ability to kind of like mess with computers. Like he can hack into things, he can communicate with computers, he can shape shift this mechanical body into different weapons, mostly guns, and he found that instead of being the helpless victim, he wanted to help others, and so he ended up joining the Teen Titans for a long time, and then he eventually joined the Justice League. So in addition to being able to shapeshift to turn into weapons and guns and things, he can also see the world differently. So one of his cybernetic eyes is able to see the world through X-ray vision or thermal vision. His metal body also makes him it gives him this natural armor, and it also makes him extremely strong because his frame is basically metal. Cyborg made his big screen debut in Batman v Superman in a short little cameo, but he will be appearing in the Justice League coming out in 2017. Next up, we're talking about a Marvel character called Blue Marvel. Blue Marvel, his real name is Adam Brashear, and back in the 60s, they kind of created this story, even though he's a relatively recent character, they created this history for him, where in the 60s, he fought crime. See, he was in an accident, he's a scientist, and he was in an accident that made him a conduit for antimatter, which is basically just this very volatile and powerful energy. And he is able to create it and control it, shoot it out in blasts, he can fly, he can do a lot of stuff. Anyways, he wore a mask back in the 60s and he fought crime. One day during a fight, the mask was kind of ripped and torn and people saw him. And back in the 60s, they weren't so hot about an African-American man having this sort of power. And so even though he saved tons of people and he was a huge hero, the president at the time asked him to step out of the limelight and stop fighting crime. So for a long time, he was kind of off the radar. He had a handler that was making sure that he wasn't causing anything. He ended up falling in love with his handler. He had a family. He became a professor. But a villain from his past came back and forced him to come back into action. And in modern day, people are a little more open about race and superheroes. And so he's able to kind of finally be the hero that he's always wanted to be. So now Blue Marvel is very prominent in the Marvel comics. He was part of the Mighty Avengers. He is very much a force to be reckoned with. So now what does this antimatter do? What does that mean? This is, imagine every time antimatter meets matter, there is a explosion. And so when he summons this forth, it is extremely volatile. It's said that if he wanted to, he could split the moon in half with a punch. He has gone toe to toe with beings like Hulk, Thor, Hyperion, Sentry. Like, some of these are from alternate realities where he had to defeat them for some reason, but their powers are equivalent to those heroes from here. So he is basically invulnerable, that this energy just protects him, gives him all sorts of offensive and defensive abilities, and he is one of the strongest heroes in Marvel Comics now. Like I said before, he's also a scientist, so this antimatter makes him even more intelligent, and his mind thinks so fast that it's beyond anything that we can comprehend. So he is thinking at a whole nother level. So that is the Blue Marvel. Up next, we have the anti-hero Spawn from Image Comics. Now, Al Simmons, he was in the military. He was kind of doing a lot of kind of black ops jobs. He killed a lot of people because he was told to, but eventually he is killed and he ends up going basically to hell. I know this is a grim story, and he makes a deal where he says, I'm gonna, let me go back and take vengeance on people that have done horrible things. In exchange, just let me see my wife again. The tricky thing is he comes back and it's 5 years later and she's happily married to someone else, and so now he's tormented. But he uses these kind of hell powers to take out the worst of the worst. And so he doesn't have a lot of morality, so he's kind of killing people, taking out the evil guys, and flirts with this idea of heaven versus hell, and the storylines progressively get more religious in context. So he's taking out street level criminals, but it becomes this war of heaven versus hell, and he is this player in that game. Next up, we have the Marvel character Luke Cage. And out of all the heroes on this list, Luke Cage is probably one of the more well-known ones. And Luke Cage is the victim of an experiment that's trying to replicate Captain America's super soldier serum. So he was in prison and they were experimenting on prisoners, and someone tried to kill him by ramping up this experiment to a point where it should have killed a man, but instead it made him basically bulletproof, where his skin cannot be pierced by bullets, knives, anything. So he becomes bulletproof. He ends up making an alliance with the hero Iron Fist, and they become the heroes for hire, where they kind of are paid to protect people and take out thugs and things that are causing problems. Like I said, his skin is unbreakable, which makes him a worthy adversary, but it also is a huge weakness because any sort of sickness, internal bleeding, the doctors cannot get to. And you saw this in the TV series Jessica Jones, where they had to figure out a creative way to get inside because they can't use needles. So fascinating story. In the comic books, he ends up falling in love with Jessica Jones. We don't know if this is the route they'll go in the TV show, and they have a beautiful little kid together. Lastly for this list is a character named Misty Knight. And Misty Knight kind of goes alongside Luke Cage. They share a lot of storylines, but she is badass. She is a trained martial artist. She has guns. She's just kicking ass. She was a police officer, and unfortunately she lost her arm in an explosion. And Tony Stark wanted to recognize her bravery and gave her a fake arm, which has all sorts of different abilities. And throughout the years, this arm has been technologically upgraded to do all sorts of things. So as it is right now in the comics, it is made of this, what's called Antarctic vibranium, which basically melts any other metal on contact, that it kind of breaks it down at a molecular level, including adamantium, which for those of you that aren't nerds, adamantium is the metal that Wolverine's claws are made of, and it's basically the second strongest metal, but this Antarctic vibranium melts it like butter. Like Luke Cage, Misty Knight also wants to help the helpless, so she teams up with this other heroine named Colleen Wing. For some reason that's really hard to say. And they form basically the opposite of Heroes for Hire, they do their own thing, where they find missing people and they help, the folks of New York. And sometimes these two teams come together and they work. Misty Knight will be appearing in the television show for Netflix, Luke Cage, so that's super exciting. I'm not sure if they're going to go the route of having her have a mechanical arm. Maybe she loses the arm in the series, not sure, but she is a complete badass and someone to look up to. So that is the first batch of African American superheroes that we're going to talk about. Again, there's going to be many more videos, so you don't need to comment saying you missed this person. I will get to them, I promise. I've got a list of probably 20-something, heroes that we're going to eventually talk about in this kind of subcategory. So don't worry, we'll get to them. We'll see you next time on Heroes Like Us.